Good afternoon, faculty and students of IIM Trichy. Welcome to Ardhaniti's first webinar of the year, Preparing for a VUCA Future by our esteemed guest, Mr. Shobhit Mathur. Shobhit completed his BTech in Computer Science and Engineering from IIT Bombay in 2004 and MS in Computer Science and Engineering from the University of Washington. After a brief stint of volunteering in Suriname, he joined Amazon.com as a database engineer. Along with his day job, he volunteered for many Hindu organizations in the US. After completing 5 years in the US, he returned to India to contribute to his motherland. He first started his stint with Youth for Seva to connect youth to society through volunteering. After scaling Youth for Seva nationally, he decided to go back and did his MBA from the Indian School of Business. He stepped out of the placement process and established Vision India Foundation with his friends from various IITs. VIF, Vision India Foundation, was aimed at engaging bright young minds in policy making and governance. Years, Vision India Foundation transformed into Rashtam School of Public Leadership. Shobhit heads it as the founding dean. Shobhit sir, the brightest minds of IMT are eagerly waiting for your words of wisdom. Over to you.
Thank you, Rajesh, and thanks to the entire IIM Trichy team. A good evening to all of you. And thank you for inviting me on a very pertinent topic, in preparing for a VUCA world or a VUCA future, as Rajesh said it. This is a thing on everybody's, top of everyone's mind. But as the subject itself says, it's kind of ironical, or it's like self-contradictory in that sense. Right? How do you prepare for something which is uncertain? So let's see. I'll try to delve into a bit, and then we'll see how much ground we can cover. I'll pause in between for a few questions, and that's when we can have a show of hands and we'll take some questions. But let's dive into this and make the most of our time we have. So the way I'll try to arrange the talk today is I'll speak about the challenges, which are fairly obvious given the whole COVID situation now, and the opportunities despite the uncertainties and the ambiguities we have, and what lies beyond both the challenges and the opportunities. Some of you have shared your questions as well. I tried to address them by including answers to them within the talk itself, but if you still have some questions, we can come to them during the talk or afterwards. Okay, so this is an article I wrote in the January of this year. This was called Colonialism, Climate Change and Camels. I don't know how many of you followed this news, but Australia, their summer and our winter in January this year saw the worst bushfires ever. In fact, it's supposed to be one of the worst in the world ever. So what happened is at the end of it, what they wanted to do was they also shot down or culled, I can call it, 10,000 camels. So they flew helicopters over Australia and they shot down camels. So this was for me a very intriguing thing, right? First of all, why is this bushfire happening? And why are they shooting down thousands of camels, right? And camels are not native to Australia. How did they end up there? Why are they shooting down camels now of all the things? So very interesting thing. And that is kind of, I would say, one of the recent examples of how this whole interconnected global situation is causing situations to arise which are totally unpredictable. So what actually happened, if you would have traced this, is that when the colonial powers reached Australia, they wanted to map Australia. So they were crisscrossing across the country, and they needed some animal to ride on that, right? So they chose the camels because Australia is primarily a desert, and the camels came from India and Afghanistan. So camels are not native to Australia. So what happens when you bring a non-native species in an ecosystem is that they kept breeding. There is no predator. There is no predator to kill the camel, right? So what happened is over a period of time, early times of the previous century, when the car was invented, the automobile was invented. Of course, the automobile is more efficient. So they chucked the camels and they started using the automobile. And the camels kept breeding and breeding, and they kept multiplying in the deserts of Australia. And they started emptying the water holes. They started also foraging on a lot of different vegetation there. So over a period of time, they grew in such huge numbers that they finally had to be culled. So that is very interesting. Nobody would have thought that when camels were taken from India and Afghanistan to Australia, that they would wreak such an havoc, that they would have to be killed in thousands and through snipers from helicopters. So that is the kind of world we are entering in. It is so difficult to predict the impact of our actions. So how come a small possible virus originating from a lab in China could I mean, all over the world, it has brought the whole economy to its knees. Entire business models are getting disrupted, right? Supply chains are getting disrupted. This humongous change in political situations, international relations, just through one small incident there. So this is the place where we are today, right? At small actions having huge outcomes. So that is what we call as the VUCA future or the VUCA world, which we are in currently. I just put it up in a small map here, which you can see that there's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Right? So volatility is rapid and unexpected challenges. Like, changes are too volatile. Uncertainty is there are a lot of unknowns, but you know that these are the things I don't know about. And complexity is there are too many decision factors. There's multiple key decision factors which are causing the change to happen. Like I spoke in the previous, there's so many different factors which could change the outcomes, and it's so difficult to predict what's happening. And then there's of course ambiguity, where you do not know what you do not know. So there's too many unknown unknowns. This is the kind of situation we are all in. But then that being said, what is important is you can see it in many different ways, right? So this is Pollock game, and on one axis is where do you see the future, right? What is your stand? So I would want you to look at this and reflect for a minute. That are you pessimistic of the future? Are you optimistic? What's the range? And what do you feel? Do you feel you can make a difference, or do you feel you cannot make a difference? And that's where the whole game is, right? One way is to think that you are powerless, that you are pessimistic of the future, you think things are getting worse, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's not, I'm free of any responsibility. I cannot change the things the way the things are happening. On the other extreme is somewhere you feel powerful, where you think things are good, they're getting better, and I can make a difference. I can participate in this change. And there is a passive stage where you think that the things are getting better, but you feel I can't do much, right? There's other larger forces at play. And there's a realist kind of spectrum as well, which says that things are getting worse, but then I can participate and get involved and try to make a change, right? So this is broadly, so this is, and as I know a lot of young students in the first year of IIM Trichy are here. So you'll see a lot of 2x2 frameworks during your MBA. And this is one of them that you, whenever there's too much of complexity, you try to make a 2x2 chart and plot it and see what it is. So we'll come to this later, but I would want you to reflect that where do you think you stand in this entire spectrum? And nothing good or bad about it, but just at least you should know that what is your stand. And you will also know that there are others in your class who think differently. So everybody sees the same data, but everybody interprets it very differently. So that's a good way to first understand what your position is. Okay. So we'll start with something, I don't know how many of you have heard of this company called Tower Records. They're saying going out of business. So I was in the US, as Rajesh said, that I was there in the US between 2004 2009. And when I went to the US, this company went bankrupt, Tower Records. Now, as you can imagine, Tower Records was a company which was selling vinyl records, cassettes, CDs, music CDs, right? And why would they go out of business in 2004, right? You would all have heard of Napster, peer-to-peer file sharing. And then a few months later, something called the iTunes by Apple came out, which they were selling individual music, songs, and while records where the whole album was being sold. So Tower Records went out of business because they were not able to compete with the likes of online file sharing, iTunes, and Napster. But there's another company which did exceedingly well, and I'm one of my favorite companies, Netflix. I used to this. So if you see this thing, I don't know how many of you know about this, but Netflix actually used to ship DVDs. So so it was like you can keep 3 DVDs, 5 DVDs at a time. They'll give you a envelope on which you can return. So they send you a DVD, you watch it, you put it back in the envelope and ship it back. That's how the file transfer used to happen. They were doing very well. A similar type of model like Tower Records, where they are using CDs and DVDs to push content. But what happened is they pivoted fairly well to the internet revolution, right? And you know now, right, how they are doing so well now. So two different companies, some big change happened. One of them survived, one of them didn't. Probably both of them have, I mean, the same data. They look at the same things, but they interpret it differently. They take different actions. That being said, you can see this thing on the right where I show you the map between 2005 to 2020, how things have changed. So you see that primarily in 2005, it was the biggest companies in terms of their market cap in billion US dollars. So you see General Electric, ExxonMobil, Microsoft, Citigroup, BP, Walmart, Royal Dutch, Johnson & Johnson. And today in 2020, if you see the top companies by market cap, huge difference. None of them survived other than you can see Microsoft in both of them, but everything else by market cap has gone. Now, who are they, right? It's primarily tech. Primarily tech. You still have Saudi Aramco there, but it's primarily tech, and the valuations are much, much higher. Right? So this is the age of tech giants. Especially, I took all tech examples here to show you that this is tech is definitely leading this change. And you can see within 15 years what's happened. And it doesn't mean in 15 years time you'll find the same, right? You could see a stark difference. You can find something else altogether in about 15 years time. But that's the rate of change happening. Okay. Again, if you look at this particular slide here, this is from ARK. You will see that they have mapped it for the past 200 plus years about the impact of innovation platforms on economic activity. So you see on the y-axis, you have economic activity, and you see them annotated by different innovations which happened in the course of last 200 plus years. And you see that definitely you have hit an exponential curve in the last decade, right? Yeah, you saw the steam engine, you saw railways, they all saw spikes in terms of economic activity. But what's happening in the last 10 years is definitely mind-blowing, right? You see this entire graph going off. 2008 was when the economic activity went down because of the recession, the housing recession which happened. But then since then, things have taken off. A blockchain, huge thing, genome sequencing, robotics, energy storage, artificial intelligence are the ones which are definitely leading it, right? So this is where we are today. And you all know that when you look at an exponential graph, it's very exciting to the ones who are trading. But at the same time, you know that this could become, this is unsustainable in many ways, right? So where is this headed? Exponential graphs are not sustainable because you are tapping into, limited resources, and you can't sustain a graph like this for too long. So something big disruptive is definitely coming up. Right, things are going to change. For example, you see energy storage there. Right, if energy storage technology keeps improving, then definitely oil is out of the window. Right, so and then you don't know what happens with more of genome sequencing, blockchain. You know these technologies and how they're impacting artificial intelligence. So these are all leading the economic activity today, and we are headed for something very, very uncharted territory in the history of mankind. That's where we are. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, every time it's told that this is the first time, never seen before, but it's always is okay. But this is something definitely unprecedented. And we have to see how nature responds to this. How does this graph pan out in 10, 20, 50 years time? So, but we are at the cusp of this. So it at one time, you can think of it as highly intimidating that, oh, I don't know where we are headed. But at the same time, you can also think of that this is super exciting times because we are fortunate to be born at this time in history where things are so rapidly undergoing a transformation, and we could play a participative role in this. Okay. But that being said, it's important to also consider this, that we are gaining the power of gods. Then without the love and wisdom of gods, we self-destruct. what we have today, no previous generation ever had, right? I mean, even the wealthiest of the people in the past did not have the comforts like we do. For example, if I'm sitting here and speaking, and there are about 250 of you online in different parts of the country and perhaps the globe, you are able to listen to what I'm saying, right? I mean, live. And just imagine, I mean, it's not the TV or something else. It is a technology which is there in our hands. We can self broadcast and do things. And then every other technology which we are leveraging today, this is historic in many ways. But then when we are given the power of the gods, right, if we do not know how to use it, then we also self-destruct. um, I see a few hands raised. I'll take a pause in a minute, and I'll take a few questions, right? So the other end of it is, it's also responsibility. It's our responsibility to upgrade our collective wisdom and intelligence, our collective capacity for sense making, choice making, and cooperation and benevolence. So this is where we are, right? Given this power and our responsibility, this is the trade-off we have today. Okay, so I'll take a pause. I know we are in an MBA class, and class participation is very important. So I'll take a few questions and then I'll move on. You could just unmute yourself and ask a question. The ones who raised their hand, I mean, I saw Gautam. Yeah, Gautam, go ahead. Gautam, you have a question? Anyone else has a question? We'll move on. So what are the challenges of this upcoming VUCA world, right? Very importantly, the world is changing, and how most organizations operate seems obsolete. You would have seen this disruption happening even during this limited pandemic time we have seen now, right? Suddenly, many organizations were forced to change the way they function. So, not just going online, right? The way the supply chains got disrupted, the way, I mean, the working style, the culture of the organizations have changed. So a lot of different things have changed, right? The uncertainty, the way, I mean, your funding sources get disrupted, your customers' behavior changes. So a lot of things have changed. So the way the most organizations, so this is a very key point I want all of you to remember, especially because you're an MBA class, is that we are trained to design certainty. We are trained all our models, and I know that a few faculty members on the call as well, and they'll agree with us that it's as much as possible we are designed for creating more and more certainty, right? You're taught statistics in your beginning term, right? You understand all this, I mean, curves with standard deviation and all this. So you always want to reduce the uncertainty in your models. That is where we are. But when the uncertainty, inherent uncertainty increases, right? The way the organizations operate is starting to get obsolete. And but again, at the same time, you can say, yes, sir, we understand this. It's easy to know, to see what's broken. But then what do I do with this, right? I know that things are not working the same way. But then can you predict what the future model will look like? Can you predict how the businesses of the future will look like? That is not easy. You know things are not working. That's the first thing to accept. But how do they be in the future? That is very difficult because you don't have a lot of data, and we are on this exponential curve as I've shown you. So there's too much change happening too soon, and it's not easy to predict what the curve will look like and where are we headed. Another important research statistic says that only half the graduates feel prepared for a job in their field, and 61% of the managers feel that graduate students are not ready for the workforce. I'll want to expand on this a bit because particularly the whole education system we have and the mindsets we have, we undergo full-time education. At least let me take the example of our undergrad. If not particularly grad school, I'm seeing more innovations happening. But in undergrad, like if you spend 4 years in a college, right, by the time you enter and by the time you leave, right, things have changed. By the time textbooks start getting written and they're published and they reach people, the content already has changed. Right? I know there are timeless things. There are, of course, axioms which are timeless, but the application part of it is constantly changing. So spending full time and the first 21 years of your life studying and then coming out and trying to implement what you have studied in school is not going to work, right? And that's fine. When you graduate, you realize that what I had studied is not good enough for me, and as well as your employers believe that this is not relevant. Things have changed, right? So this is a big change happening, which we'll have to be aware of. So as I said earlier, we were educated to operate in a predictable and controlled scenarios, right? And executives were trained to avoid uncertainty at any cost. So this is the way our mindsets are, the business models are, everything else is designed this way. But that's why this is a challenge in the upcoming VUCA futures, right? So living in a transition era requires humility to accept we cannot predict the future. So do we have the humility to accept that we do not know? This is one thing which I feel that our education system or our interview processes for our jobs, for our higher education, they do not appreciate this as much, that you should, and this is the reality. If someone today says that I know, right, definitely it's not true. I don't think there's anyone out there who knows how this is going to pan out. So we need that, we have that humility to say that we do not know. We cannot predict. This is a very deep-seated thing. And a lot of people have asked me in these questions which I sent before the session, that how do we prepare for this? I think this is one of the key lessons, if you can take from this, is that neither do I, right? I might be giving this talk, but I'm just putting out what's there in collectively all our minds out there. It is not very sure. So let us have this humility, because only when you have this humility, that's when you can act. We'll take a pause and I'll see if there are any questions. If there are any questions, please unmute and ask.
Hello, sir. Sumit this side.
Yes,
Sir, in the previous slide, you talked about, say, how the technology is changing the world. So I think, say, in the just review, yeah. So you mentioned, say, particular, say, 5 type of technology. So say the organizations are changing at a very fast rate, and maybe these 5 technologies are able to survive. So in an organization, there's an internal conflict, say, which one to tap, which we are going to work or not. Because say, if you are agreeing with, so okay, we are going with this technology and we are going to work, maybe that won't work. Yeah. So this in organization means there is redundant, means whether I'm going to adopt for this or not.
Thanks, Sumit, for asking that question. So you're already putting the hat of a business owner, and you are asking me this question that as a business, on which technology do I train my people, right? Because by the time we are ready for it and we have prepared the infrastructure, probably you get disrupted again. So that's a very fair question. That's where a lot of different studies are happening to kind of predict. But so I don't, so I have not listed particular technologies, but I can list particular trends here, right? So definitely these trends are new. For example, I think you know each of these trends which I have listed there. For example, blockchain. So blockchain is like this distributed ledger. So it's a ledger which cannot be changed. It is distributed, so there is no central ownership, right? It's immutable in many ways. So this is a very, very unique thing. So far, we had a centralized authority which would keep checks and balances. Now you are saying we don't need. So what happens? You can start your own reserve bank and generate money. You could do many other things like this. So this is, I'm saying the fundamental nature of the technology is very important. So a lot of new things will be built on this particular technology. Like genome sequencing. If you can sequence, map out every part of your genome, then the implications of this are tremendous, right? You could go right from designing babies to stem cells, to treating unknown diseases, new types of targeted drugs. So a lot of different, so I'm saying there are underlying dynamics of this energy storage. For a lot of time, I think lithium ion was the state of art, but that's changing again. So when a fundamental battery technology comes in, so you don't probably need the power grids like which we have today. We don't need oil-based automobiles like we have in the past. So I'm saying trends will not change as much, but the technologies built on them will keep changing. Artificial intelligence definitely is there. Would you use it for autonomous cars? Would you use it for military weapons? Would you use it for something else? That is true. But this is going to stay. But I think a larger point I would want to make is that so much of economic activity is not sustainable in the in nature's limits as well. That we'll have to be cognizant of. If you start feeling that I am God, right, you will get a rap on your knuckles very soon. So you'll have to be conscious that there is something which is not modeled in this entire chart as well. So I see, I can't answer your question completely, Sumit, but I'm saying that there are broadly trends happening. Technologies and applications will be built on top of these trends. Would the trends change? The trends would not change as much, but companies built on these trends would come and go. So I think that's important to remember. Okay, I'll take one more question and then I'll move on. I saw a hand being raised. Vijay? Oh, Vaibhav, sorry.
Sir, you mentioned upcoming trends. So how do we regulate it? The use of artificial intelligence in self-driving cars, these are very difficult to regulate. How do we regulate and manage it?
Yeah, thanks, Vaibhav, for that question. So I think that's a totally different topic altogether, but I think I could get your larger point that, see, technology innovation always will outpace policy. It has always happened, and it will continue to happen because innovation by its very nature is disruptive. And see what happens today, perhaps there is an upcoming technology out there that we are just observing, right? For example, autonomous cars. So they are just being tried and tested, right? You see Tesla doing it, other companies are coming out and doing it. So you can say, fine, it's happening, right? But then you think it's far off. By the time the policymakers understand and try to regulate it or design something, a policy around it, it will outpace. It will outpace you. That is the challenge. So technology, because policy making is always in that sense, collaborative, integrative, democratic. It has to take all the different stakeholders in mind and then design. Technology disruption need not happen that way. Somebody sitting in some dorm room out there built the Bitcoin, right? And the Bitcoin, just through the power of the internet and the computing power which we have today, was adopted by many people. By the time the Reserve Bank of India thought of how do we react to this, it's already there. So I'm saying technology will outpace policy making for sure. That's the big challenge of the future and as well as the opportunity. If you are if you want to be in policy making, if you want to be involved in these overall broadly governing such type of technologies, this is a very, very awesome opportunity. Typically, in the past, it was the humanities students who would be able to be in those chairs. So typically it was understanding sociology, anthropology, and these domains who would be involved in policy making. But then without understanding the underlying technology, today you cannot do anything, right from regulating the WhatsApp, regulating anything else. But this encryption, there is autonomous drones flying around. You don't know what the drone policy would be. You don't know what privacy means. You don't know how this cloud technology is happening, and everything is disruptive. Okay, so to keep the answer short, what I'm saying is it's a challenge. It has always been a challenge, but it's also an awesome opportunity if you can get a handle of both ends. If you understand technology and you understand policy making, you will be uniquely placed going forward. Okay. So I'll move on and I'll take some more questions later because I also have some content to cover. So keep your questions coming, keep them in your mind. I'll pause again in some time. So I spoke about the challenges of a VUCA world. So this is a futurist, America-based futurist. His name is Alvin Toffler. He says the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write. That's how we defined literacy in the past, right? But those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. It's very, very important. Especially for most of us who think, oh, my education, my formal education is done by the time I'm 21 or 25, right? No more. Learning is the imperative. You will have to continue to learn. That means you'll have to unlearn and relearn. And you are not getting any younger, right? So your neurons have stopped forming those interconnections. So how do you keep yourself learning all the time? That is how the literacy of the future would be defined. Very interesting point. Okay, so how do you survive and thrive? So building on my previous point, functional expertise is shifting rapidly. Constant learning is necessary to stay on top of the game. So functional expertise, right? So I am a specialist in understanding this. For example, I'll give you a recent example of what happened, right? So this whole COVID situation. So what do you have? You have your experts. you have your epidemiologists, you have your economists, and you have your virologists. You have many different people. But to this day, even now, right, 6 months after the pandemic kind of hit the world, you still cannot predict where it is going, because you need somebody who understands different aspects, right? So you may understand the virus very well, but if you don't understand people's behavior, it's a problem, right? You can understand probably economics, right? But you'll not understand people's behavior. You are at loss again. For example, the policymakers in India thought that if I can offer all this migrant labor a good home or a place to stay and give them food, they would stay put where they are. But then they didn't understand the behavior of the people, right? In India, whenever an uncertainty hits, whenever there's a crisis, you want to be with family, come what may. Okay, so in the peak of the summer, you saw this different interstate workers leaving their other place where they're working and walking back to their home hundreds of kilometers, carrying their babies with them in the peak of the summer without knowing whether they'll make it or not. And some of them didn't. Totally would disrupt any IAS officer's mind, right? That I gave you everything, why are you behaving so differently, right? Because for them, security is not food. For them, security is their home somewhere far away. They want to be there, even if it means they have to die when they get there. So this is very different. So functional expertise is not going to work anymore. You will need to move beyond your subject matter. And the modern education is always trying to specialize you in something. So that's definitely not going to work going forward. Then you have something a very important point, and which I'll be building on it in the rest of the presentation, is that skills, we have to move beyond skills to something called a meta skill. A meta skill is a master skill that magnifies and activates other skills. So you will see that some of you are very good at picking languages, right? You will learn new languages very fast. So learning a particular language, you could call it as a skill, but somebody understands the inherent structure in languages and is able to learn new languages very fast. So that's a meta skill. Right? So skills will get outdated very fast, but meta skills are permanent. So I'll come to what these meta skills are in future, I mean in the later slides, but then think of a skill which will help you develop new skills. That's what is a meta skill. And there's a lot of talk around this nowadays, that how do you focus your education or your personal education also on meta skills. And we cannot, of course, this is now fairly true, that we cannot use a binary approach too much, right? So there's all, the reality is too complex. Anyone who says you are on this side or that side, it's not going to work. There's no black or white. There is, this reality is too complex. There are too many factors at play, very, very interconnected. And this whole chaos theory, right? A butterfly flaps its wings and then there's a tornado happening somewhere else at the other end of the Pacific, right? So this is what it is, right? So there's too many interconnected factors at play today, and there's no more that this or that. So I think we have to think beyond the binaries. So this builds a cognitive load when you have to understand too many factors being interconnected and at play. And adaptability is the new competitive advantage. So this is the bottom line, that the ones who adapt quickly, right? That is the competitive. So how can you remain light, agile, nimble, right? How do you adapt to changes? Can you do what Netflix did and which Tower couldn't do, right? So Tower went down, but Netflix survived. How quickly they adapted, how quickly they chucked their DVDs, went online, built a streaming service, and then are now thriving, right? So many other companies like this, you will see how quickly they adapt. So adaptability is the new competitive advantage. Typically, we are taught, even in business school, to build a particular expertise in a particular way, invest your resources, build those moats, right? You will see those Porter's 5 forces. How do you build this moat? Others. So you are trying to secure yourself all the time. Perhaps in securing yourself too much, you yourself get trapped. You have to be careful that you cannot change too much too fast. So this is where we are. So this is something which all of you should carefully look at, right? So there are many such meta skills. I picked up a few of them which I feel are very, very important. And you will see it says adaptability is the core meta skill. right? Given that we are entering a VUCA world. So what do you have? You have creativity, you have resilience, and you have self-awareness. Let's look at self-awareness first. So what does it say? It says accepting reality. So when I say accept reality, also it means accepting what you do not know, right? Very, very difficult. Knowing oneself. How much of our education is training you to know yourself? So when I say know yourself, it also means understanding your biases, right? What am I ignoring? What do I not know? Right? What are my strengths and weaknesses? What are my vulnerabilities? Right? We should be trained on these things. And it's not just you. When I say self-awareness, it's also about the organization or the company you're working for. Is it cognizant of itself? Right? And empathy, you'll keep listening to this a lot, that how do you be more empathetic to the outside situations, to other individuals, right? So how do you listen more and absorb the information? So these are very different type of skills. They are meta skills. If you develop them, then you develop a lot of different skills. Currently, if we talk about skills, then the whole jargon today is on communication skills, right? So how do you speak in public? How do you shake hands? How do you flash your visiting card, right? These are all external things, but something which is more fundamental, which will allow you to develop these other skills externally, are to be developed. Creativity, which is problem solving, innovation, improvisation. Not very easy, though it looks like, yeah, creativity, everybody talks about creativity, but it is the core of adaptability. How do you improvise as the situation changes, right? How do you embed innovation in your organization, right? How do you create a culture of problem solving, right? This is very, very important, as well as resilience, right? So this is about you learn, fail and learn, fail and learn, experiment, fail, learn, right? So this is how do you keep doing this quickly and smartly. So these are the meta skills of the future, and then I'll come to more of them. But broadly, I hope you got the idea of meta skills. So the world is moving away from very particular skills to a world of meta skills. And how do we bring this into the education is something else. But otherwise, how do we start developing this ourselves is very important to know. Yeah. Okay, so an important point, why, and there's some questions around this, why I addressed this in the slide here. Why I feel that the MBA education is not complete, though I myself have done my MBA from the Indian School of Business. I've gone through this, so I know what it is. And I know a lot of it is changing, and a lot of it has changed since I've graduated also. But I think you will appreciate this once you get into school, that few things which I feel are incomplete and can be completed by your personal initiative is that we are not taught to be vulnerable or accept our vulnerabilities. And we are always taught to be self-confident and presenting ourselves as very self-assured people, right? That's okay. That's maybe a trick you will use, but that trick is not going to survive when you are leading people. You need to be very conscious that you are in a VUCA world. There are a lot of unknowns which you don't know about, right? Or unknowns which you know about and you can't do much about. And the changes are too rapid, right? There are too many factors and I can't model them. So these are very important to, first of all, you have to accept this. This is a part of this. I spoke about the empathy deficit. So always being this corner office, flamboyant person, which we are trained to be, is not going to work, right? So you will have, because problem solving in the future is definitely collaborative. See, all centralized institutions and organizations kind of collapsed in this whole pandemic. The ones which were decentralized and decision making was left at the margins, right? Those are the ones who survived. Because if you try to centralize and take decisions in a rapidly changing environment, it's too difficult. You want to delegate responsibility and asking your subordinates to improvise and take decisions. So that's empathy. That's where you kind of listen to the rapid changes happening and you delegate and you empower them to do their own things. So another thing which I felt is important. And I talked about creativity as being one of the meta skills. But where in our formal education or in your corporate trainings do you ever get to officially get trained on creativity? It's not there. I mean, it's somehow our business education is like we create very razor sharp people who can draw these MECE frameworks and solve consulting problems, right? But then if I give you a very ambiguous situation, you don't come out with an out of the box way of cracking it, because our brains are not wired. Our brains are wired to look at break up a larger problem into smaller parts, solve the smaller parts, and the larger problem will get solved. It doesn't work like that anymore because you don't know what the smaller parts are. You don't know the interdependencies among them, right? You don't know what new things will come in. So creativity is definitely something not there, right? And building on that, we are all trained to be very fast level 1 thinkers, as called, right? So immediate outcomes, causality. If I do this, this will happen. This is what we are all trained to be. But then complex situations require something called deep thinking. So slowness, reflective responses, deliberative responses are not encouraged as much in the previous corporate environments which we have had, right? So it's not so easy to say, I'll get back to you tomorrow, I'll get back to you next week. So it's all about, oh, give me the whiteboard, I'll tell you how to solve this, right? So that I think would not work. If you are managing people, or if you are yourself going to be one of these people, you'll have to lead by saying that we need to get into deeper thinking. Things are not so obvious anymore. Okay. And of course, the culture, right? So how do you build a culture of innovation? Okay, so these are all buzzwords, right? Creativity, culture, empathy, success, self-awareness. These are all thrown at you just like that. But what I want you to do is, because through this, through my own personal experience, I'm telling you that these are very deep concepts. Let's not go very superficially with them, because ultimately it is about your own futures which you're talking about here. So we will have, suppose we have to build innovation in our culture. Every company will say we are innovative, right? But what are the aspects of being innovative? What is, so you have a culture of experimentation over perfection, right? So would you allow your team members to experiment, fail, and not just always look for being perfect, right? Do you have a culture of having empathy? Because empathy is about listening, empathy is about decentralizing decision making, right? Over egos of particular personalities, over doing, over planning, right? So you could plan all you want, right? But as we know, planning is important, but plans are nothing. Because when you go about doing something, you know the plans didn't work. Planning is important, but you should also understand the limits of planning. Because ultimately, when the rubber hits the road, the things change. Right? So this is the changes which are happening, right? And that's why, and typically we are not trained on these things. And I'm risking myself because I know there are faculty members here, but yes, I think all of them would also broadly agree with what I'm saying here. But these are the new things which are coming up, and it's not just MBA education; it's the complete education system itself, right? So what we are taught and how we, I mean, give our examinations, how do we get where we have got? That's not going to work in the future. Right? So I'll take a pause here and I'll take a couple of questions. You could. Rest of you can be on mute, but once you have asked a question, you could unmute yourself. So I see Swati raising her hand. Swati, go ahead.
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes. So, sir, a lot of what you said, I could relate it to psychology and mental health.
Okay.
So, I mean, what are the interventions that you feel are important in the public domain that can put psychology and mental health and knowing oneself at the forefront of policies and corporate, particularly the way corporates function?
Yeah. Thanks, Swati, for that question. See, so far, if I was also there in your situation earlier, when people would say psychology, right, it would think like, okay, this is for someone who's not. It's like those softer guys who cannot have a control over themselves, right? This is business, corporate board meetings are not meant for the weaker minds. So this, we have developed a very different, what should I say, arrogant way of approaching that we know, right? And I think there is more and more space developing for people who have a background in psychology, who understand human behavior, because without factoring people and how they behave, you cannot succeed. Right? As I gave you a simple example of the interstate workers who kind of had a big problem this summer. but it's all over the place. If you don't factor how people respond, it's there in war, it is there in business boardrooms, right? For example, now you have to get the economy back on track, right? We know it's easy to do a lockdown, right? You put a ban, you use the force of police, but how do you get people out of it now, right? How do you get things working? Very difficult. If you don't understand psychology, how do you make this work? Same thing with your customers, right? How does Ola get its customers back in their cabs? What will they communicate? How does Zomato make the people buy the food from restaurants once again? So it's true in the business world, it's true in the policy world, it's true in personal lives. How do you get kids to schools? Right? How do you convince parents to send their kids to schools if it ever comes to that? So it's same thing you're seeing with the NEET and JEE crisis, right? It's a huge crisis. What do? You have to take a decision. How do people behave? What do they want? How do people think of their careers? Right. So these are very, very important things. And I think there's more and more appreciation of this coming up. I am pretty sure in your MBA, you will learn about behavioral economics. So behavioral economics was the initial part of it, where the economics is trying to factor. Because economics was supposed to be all this rational mind was the basic assumption. And very soon they realized that that doesn't work anymore. Your microeconomic models don't work in the real world exactly. So you have to bring in this X factor about the human mind. And that's how that field is evolving. And every other field is evolving in the same way. You have to understand people. Thanks for asking that. Do we have? Okay, so I'll move on. Yeah, so also builds on what Swati just said, right? There's something because I wrote about self-awareness there. So I just wanted to elaborate a bit more on self-awareness. I know the slide is a bit hazy, but what happens when two different managers look at the same data but interpret completely different things? How are they interpreting things very differently? So you observe a given data or an experience, both of you go together. This happens a lot in, I mean, popular example is Cephology, right? Where you predict election results. So the same team goes, they look at the same data set, they come up with very different type of predictions. One of them is way off and one of them is spot on. So how did you, what did you see? What did you not see? What data do I select? Because when you see or experience something, you select some data. Right? And then you have a personal, cultural background, right? Your upbringing, which adds meaning to that experience. Then you add some assumptions on top of that. Then you draw some conclusions based on those assumptions. Then you develop some beliefs about the world. And then you take an action. Okay. And then this repeats. And then again, you go back and collect data. So what happens is a lot of personal beliefs, cultural assumptions, you build on what you see and then you draw a decision, right? So when Netflix and Tower Records see the emerging trends, two different companies responded in two different ways. One of them survived and one of them went bankrupt, right? So how does it, so we have to be very aware of our beliefs, assumptions, cultural conditioning when we look at the world. So this comes from a very fundamental thing called self-awareness. So it's self-awareness. Yes, sir, I'm self-aware. That's not the answer. Right? Though all of you might claim to be so, and I might also claim to be so, but it is much more deeper than that. And I'll come to how we can develop this. But this is a very, very core reflective way of approaching the world. That is why it's one of the key meta skills I have listed there. That building a self-awareness. If you want to be successful personally, or your organization has to be successful there, you will have to develop this deep reflective way of looking at how am I interpreting the world? How am I looking at the world? How am I drawing my own conclusions? What are my inherent biases, conditioning which I have? Right? Very, very important. Okay. So this meta skills approach is not very limited only to what I showed you. There are a lot of different frameworks out there which have talked about this. So this is OECD Learning Framework 2030, all right? So it's no more about just skills, if you see this. Even skills, they have divided into cognitive skills, social and emotional skills, and practical skills. So primarily, we usually talk about physical and practical skills, but they have expanded it to cognitive and metacognitive, social and emotional skills. And they're talking about knowledge and attitudes and values. So all these together will develop your competencies, right? And then there is the entire ecosystem. You have your parents, teachers, communities, and peers, all of them influencing. And that's how we have to develop the learning framework for future. So make it as a personal learning. I'm not talking about an MBA education alone here. I'm talking about how, when I said you'll have to learn, unlearn, and relearn constantly till the end of your life. That is the demand which is there on you. So that means developing your competencies based on all these things, right? So your knowledge should be interdisciplinary, right? Your skills should also include cognitive skills, emotional skills, social skills, right? And your attitudes and values should involve society and look at the global context as well. Right? So this is the different ways people are trying to approach learning. So it was very interesting that Scotland, right? Scotland developed, how do they want to educate their future, citizens of the country, right? How do they want a future working force? So they also came up with this 12 meta skills, right? Broadly categorized into 3 categories. So self-management, social intelligence, and innovation. Okay, so let's look at just the first one. And I'll perhaps share these slides, or the video will also be online. You can have a look at others later. Just look at the first one, which is called focusing. Okay, fairly okay, sir, I know what's focusing, right? But just imagine today, most of the gaming, economy is based on an attention. It's trying to grab your attention, right? You have these 60 minutes in an hour. How much of that can I take for my business? So how much are we able to focus? How many of us are able to read a book for an hour without looking at your WhatsApp message or your Twitter feed? Are we able to stay focused on a particular issue long enough while the entire economy is being built on distracting you, or is built on pulling your attention towards its business goals? So how do you sorting, attention, filtering, right? So the ability to manage cognitive load by filtering and sorting information in order to maintain a sense of focus in an age of information overload and constant change. That is focusing. So with this loads of information, I'm pretty sure about the 200 plus people of you who are there on this call are at the same time probably also looking at your WhatsApp messages or browsing something else, right? So can we stay focused? And I think, and with my limited experience of leading big teams, what I can definitely say is that this differentiates people. This differentiates people. The ones who I want to hire, the ones who I want to promote, the ones who will make it big are the ones who can develop this meta skill of focusing their attention on a particular thing long enough. So that is very, very important. So there are many other things listed here, but this is a meta skill and it comes under the category of self-management. Then there's something about social intelligence and innovation, and I've broken it up into this different skills written here. So these, so when a lot of you are asking questions about, sir, how do we prepare ourselves for this? These are some of the skills which people are talking about. They're called the skills of the future. They're called the meta skills. So I wanted to take a pause and also talk a bit about my lessons at an MBA, because I felt as being one of your seniors, I should also share what things I felt I did right. I did a lot of wrong things, but what I did right, I want to say. Choosing my courses, one thing I definitely did is I chose diversity over specialization. This was still 5 years ago. I graduated in 2015. But why it was very important is, a lot of people used to say, choose a core. Choose a core. So when people would say, no, you have to see, choose a core, either it has to be operations, it has to be IT, it has to be marketing, it has to be finance, choose something core. So I didn't choose any of these. I chose to be very diverse. I went across, I graduated with 3 concentration areas, as they're called. I chose strategy, entrepreneurship, and public policy. So wanted to keep it very diverse, do multiple things. Other common refrain which I heard and people used to say, my peers would tell me, was choose technical subjects, right? Choose mergers and acquisitions. Why are you choosing HR, right? So don't choose the soft courses which are all fluff and they don't matter much. But I'll tell you, one of the key courses which has been very useful to me post my MBA has been change management. So we had a course on change management, a very, very important topic. Right? Negotiation is very popular. A lot of people do negotiation. A lot of people also take up few HR courses, but something like change management, at that time, I would not realize its importance. But then I liked the pitch of the course, which said that how did it had case studies of the Indian Railways, it had case studies of SBI, which reformed itself in the face of competition from private banks. So seemed like a very fascinating thing to me, that choosing courses like change management, public policy gives me a more broader and a more timeless kind of an approach, right? For example, there were a lot of finance courses taught by the current CEA, right? Krishnamurthy Subramanian, who was a faculty at ISB. But he was a star faculty, but I never wanted to. I was like, okay, I understand what's corporate finance. It's good enough for me, right? Because that's not the area I'm getting into, first of all. Secondly, when I have to pick it up, I'll pick it up. But what I can't pick up is something of this so-called software courses, which are very good in a very collaborative setup where you have other teammates, because I can hear their views. I can learn more from how they, because ultimately people like them would be my employees. So it's very important to understand what's going on in their mind. If I have to value WhatsApp and why Facebook bought them for so much, right, that's fine. I'll pick it up somewhere else. But I will not be able to pick up how people behave in an organization setup. Right? These are very important things for me. So I chose them. I did a lot of personal one-on-one deeper relationships, right? As opposed to announcing to the class and trying to reach out to many people. So I built very long-term relationships, right? That's the next one I said, with faculty, with alumni, with people of diverse interests within my batch. These are all which mattered a lot going forward, right? And as I said, always being self-aware as opposed to going by peer pressure. Ultimately, of course, I stepped out of placements and did Vision India Foundation, started that. But that was also very conscious because of being aware of where I feel I should be, what are my strengths, and also my background was in the development space. So I wanted to come back to that. But being able to, I see a lot of people who come in and just get swayed by the different forces which come. And ultimately, you see when placements happen, what I constantly observed is most of the batch is unhappy, even though they would have got something which they would have not thought before getting into ISB, but because it's always somebody who's got more than them. So they're like, "Arey yaar, this guy, he never attended class, he was in my group, he always was a freeloader, he made it, he did this, he did that, right? My interview panel was unfortunate," all those different things, right? So at the end of it, I was like, boss, I mean, do you know what you want? You're just being driven by outside forces. Okay. So one very key thing which I believe is that all these things I'm talking about are coming from a sense of personal leadership, right? And why I take this example is it's a timeless example. Here you have Arjuna, who is perhaps the world's best archer, right? The most skilled person ever, right? In terms of using the bow and arrow, but then still put in a war situation where he should thrive, he fails. And then there's somebody like Sri Krishna who has to give him these meta skills and give him more about the self-awareness, context awareness, and that's how he develops and manifests his skills on the war situation, right? That's where we are. So, but a very fundamental thing is, let's not look at these meta skills as competitive advantages. This is how I will develop something and I'll beat the guy next to me. These are very, very deep skills which will change you as an individual. And at least in our philosophical base, what it is important is we are not talking about temporal gains. We're talking about transcendence. So becoming bigger than yourself in many ways, right? Doing it for a larger cause, right? So you talk about dharma or something. Right? So this is very unnatural in I know in a business school presentation that you have something from philosophy coming in, but I think there is no getting away. Without this, there is no answer. Because these are the ones which will keep you grounded, especially when the world around you is changing too fast. And we'll have to give it. So seeking, we have lost connect with our deepest self. So everyone please pause. Please mute yourself. And meta skills are not just for competitive gains, but to connect with our inner self is very important. Again, though these all look like I've heard them before, I know what this is, not a big deal. As I told you, at the end of the day, if you don't understand yourself, You may see everybody of your batch today is nervous about placements when they will happen 1.5 years from now, right? And I'm telling you, 90% of your batch will go out unhappy. Not because you didn't get placed, because somebody else got placed better than you, or something else happened, or things changed, things were not in your control. So developing this inner conviction, inner stability, inner assurance is very, very important, and no other substitute without diving deeper into our philosophical basis, and I should say also the practices are there. So meta skills are not just something you read in a book and you pick it up and you will be prepared for the VUCA future. No, it doesn't work like that. So if you have to learn, unlearn, relearn, who is giving you this cognitive capacity of being able to keep your mind sharp at the age of 60, right? When you face the biggest crisis, you come out well out of it. So what is the knowledge base? What are the practices in this world which can keep you always sharp, right? Which can keep you relearning, unlearning, and doing this together, always being aware, always being empathetic, always, right, as I said, being resilient to change. This is not going to happen easily unless you are firm footed, and the footing will not come purely on an intellectual basis by reading something. It has to come through practice. And that's where I wanted to touch upon what we, I think is important. And there's a lot of literature. I just picked up something from the Bhagavad Gita, but there's much more than that. We are also doing this as the Dean of the Rashtam School of Public Leadership. So we intend to build the future public leaders for this country based on such type of meta skills which are grounded in our civilizational knowledge base. So we call it the Jnana Shakti, Ichha Shakti, and Kriya Shakti, and we have built our curriculum based on that. You can see it's the meta skills curriculum, and that is where we believe that the future leaders of not just this country but across the globe need something like this, because you saw the same crisis hits the whole world. Some people react very differently. Some nations went down, some nations thrived. So how did it happen? How did the leadership react to this? So you will have to train people for the future on these principles, and that's how the curriculum at Rashtam is being built. This is the final slide. So if the external situations are going out of control, how do you keep your interior team control? Thank you everyone. We'll now take questions. Unmute and ask. So I have the Dheeraj. Yeah, Dheeraj, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I had a question like, can diversifying yourself can be a meta skill? Because we have seen companies like Google and Amazon, still they are in best in their business. They are diversifying. Suppose Google is going into genome sequencing, then they are trying automatic cars, and so can that be a meta skill for a company or an individual?
Yeah, Dheeraj, thanks for that question. I think it's a very nice way to put it. Are there meta skills for companies as well? Very true. I think, see, all these principles are valid at a micro level to a macro level. So definitely, if you say diversification of our skill set at an individual level, also it's true for the company level. Now, see, this is a fairly standard business principle where you diversify your businesses, diversify your revenue streams. So if, for example, while I was at ISB, we used to have this case study of why did ITC enter into hotels, right? ITC was traditionally supposed to be selling cigarettes, right? They did hotels, they did into FMCG goods. So why do they keep diversifying? So it's, of course, being resilient is one part of it. But again, what we have to see beyond that, right? Because there are unlimited ways where you can diversify. There should be some ways of building synergies across these different revenue streams as well. But at the same time, what you'll have to remember is how adaptable you are. Okay. Now, I'm saying it's easy to say diversification, but how much investment will you make in it? What type of businesses will you make an investment into? So these things we have to be very careful about, because the choices are not so obvious. And when do you realize that things are not going well for you, right? For example, I worked for Amazon, right? This guy, Jeff Bezos, when I used to work for him, of course, was not the richest man in the world. But then he decided to come out with Kindle when I was there, and the Amazon Web Services. Now, I was at the back end of Amazon Web Services. I was like, we are not a tech company, right? We are a e-commerce company. We sell books and stuff, right? Why are we getting into cloud services? Or why are we getting into selling a Kindle which will kill our own business of selling books. But he had a fairly strong conviction about diversifying his business into products and into a technology company, and then he invested rightly into them and has seen the future. But he didn't diversify too much. He saw the trends, and so it also is a leadership question. So where do you see the trends going and how do you invest on them? But it's a fair point. Meta skills for companies is a very well taken point. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We have Divyansh. Divyansh, you can unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, hello, sir. Sir, I wanted to ask that in terms of like choosing maybe subjects in MBA, like specialization, like you went for a diverse set of subjects. So what is the decision-making criteria? Like, how do you choose what's good for you and what's not, like that kind of?
See, this is a very individual question. I will not be able to answer without knowing you very well, Dheeraj. But what I'm trying to get at is, see, we will not get into too much formal education for the rest of our life. Rest of your life, you will be mostly in an informal education. You'll be learning yourself. So when you have an opportunity to learn from stalwarts, let us go and pick and choose based on the faculty, based on the course content, based on other students could be part of your cohort and learn from them, and not base our decisions only on I have to do a finance major because IIM Trichy has good finance placements, right? That's not a fair way, and I'm pretty sure employers also now are pretty smart to say, yeah, did you do these 3 courses by this prof, then we'll hire you. Your seniors might tell you different things, but I'm saying I'm definitely seeing a change that in due course of time, if you go into an interview and say, no, I also did a public policy course which taught me on how public investments, are good or bad, or what happens in the PSU sector, I think it will be fairly well appreciated in interview if you can make a case for that. Or if you say, I also chose in entrepreneurship because I wanted to learn that if I am heading a new business division in my corporate, if I have to develop a new product, then how do I do it, right? So, for example, Tim Cook was a operations guy, right? So Steve Jobs put him up into the CEO position, and he's grown the company multifold today. So he had to be an innovator at the end of the day, right? People thought he cannot be. So I think if you're able to convince that I have a diverse set of skills, it places not just, I'm not looking at only cracking interviews. It will make you in a better position for the rest of your life. Like today, I understand supply chain, I understand finance, I understand marketing, I understand, right? And the specialization in that, on demand, I can learn. Right? I can go to so many online courses on demand whenever I need it, I can learn. But I need to have a wider understanding of everything, a depth, right? So the called T model, right? You have a breadth and you also have a depth. Choosing both is very important, right? I think you can get the breadth during your business education, and you can go to a depth later as the situation demands, on demand learning.
Thank you, sir.
We have okay, we have Palash Pratim.
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Palash.
So I have a question, sir. Regarding is this growth sustainable? The technology graph you showed, sir, is better, but I am quite sure 2020 will be something, the curve will go down. Right? The curve shows the economic curve, corresponding to technological advancements. So I think the curve will go down. So my question is that we will hit a bottleneck. My proposition is that we will hit a bottleneck. The technology is growing so fast. The human generations, right? The children, the future generations, the same MBA degree, and in 25 years we will have to, our MBA graduate will have to learn a lot of other things more than what we learn. Right? So I think there is a bottleneck arriving in the future generation. So what is your comment on that?
So Palash, your voice was not very clear, but I think what I got is I didn't see a dip yet. Actually, you are saying you saw a dip in the exponential graph. It's not there yet, and you are saying in 25 years things will change. What I think definitely has not been factored, and I think is that the planet has its own limits. Okay, so there is a limitation on how much economic activity this planet can sustain. The whole finance banking system has its own limits, and we are seeing more and more of this. So we are trying to go exponential in a very bounded resource setup. So it is not sustainable, right? The regeneration of the planet is not exponential. It is not catching up with the pace at which economic activity is growing. right? So that is definitely an issue, right? So for example, can you have commercial aviation at the same pace? Probably not. It is not sustainable, right? Can you grow your cities and economic activity at the same pace? Probably not. So I'm saying your economic activity eventually has to come in sync with the supply, which is also the planet's regeneration capacity. Today, what we are seeing is, despite all this economic activity, yet you are not able to generate wealth in the perceived way, because there is a cost. And if climate change happens, that is going to impact. You will have to make resilient to that, right? You already are seeing warmer winters, you are seeing floods, you are seeing this. You have to be resilient to all these things. So you'll have to keep matching what the planet is doing to you by investing on that. So ultimately, what trickles down as your profit keeps reducing. What I'm trying to say is, the planetary boundaries are not factored into the economic activity today. And you will see very soon that this is why whatever we are seeing in terms of the economic activity by these new technologies will eventually run out. For example, genome sequencing. Let's say, so people are working on increasing human lifetime, right? Human lifespan. I think you know about this, right? So people are thinking, why should we assume that we can live for 80 years? Why can't we live for 200 years? And if we understand the genome sequence and if you understand stem cells, we can treat diseases like keep reviving your organs and you'll keep living for. It's not sustainable, boss. I mean, so either you stop reproducing, you can't reproduce at the same rate and also live longer, right? You live a very pathetic life with much fewer resources than the caveman probably. So I'm saying that these technologies will hit their cap by the regeneration capacity of the planet itself. That's where the disruption will happen, and that's why this whole attempt of understanding how to build more sustainable technologies, more dharmic technologies, this is coming up now. Okay. Okay. Thanks. So we'll go to Subramanian.
Yes, sir. Subramanian here. So my question is related to like myself as an individual. When I tend to speak about something passionate, I tend to get loud and excited. You know, I speak really very fast. But as a leader, I should be calm and collected. So when I'm speaking calm and collected, how do I get the passion I feel for the subject across?
No, see, okay, Subramanian, that is okay, very different question. You're saying that, see, leadership, why have you assumed that speaking fast and speaking passionately is not being calm and composed, right? So this is the balance. Okay, so I'll delve into something because I also spoke about the civilizational wisdom. Most of our leadership jargon is very superficial, right? See, I would see a person like you who is, you are speaking fast because it's not that you have been trained to speak fast, right? It's also called, there's an Ayurvedic dosha for this, in the sense that it's not dosha in that sense, that you are a high vata, right? You are a person of wild ideas, you think fast, you are able to communicate these things, right? But then at the same time, if it is too much of that, then it's you're not able to pay attention, focus on one particular thing for too long. There are the other extreme. Other extreme people are, when a new bright idea is thrown at you, they will not absorb it. You will see this in your classroom, right? Some people latch on to airy ideas, right? Ideas which are visionary, out there very easily. Some people are very skeptical about them. They are like, let me get more data, let me understand more, let me do more interviews. Then they don't adapt as fast. So what I'm saying is, you should see your particular personality as a strength. You will definitely be very good at thinking wild, innovating, and being able to express those ideas. But at the same time, you should be conscious that not everybody in your room will relate to you. A lot of time you will face this block that, why don't you get it? So obvious, right? This is the next technology of the world, right? But there would be people in your team who would say, wait a minute, let's pause and listen more. So you should be, that is where I come with the empathy aspect, that these are my strengths, let me build on it, but let me also understand that other people will think differently. And these are also my weaknesses. If I do too much of this, then I'm never fixed on my strategy. I make a 3-month plan, but I change it every 3 days. That's not going to work. So so that is why fundamentally, if you understand yourself, the self-awareness aspect of it, as I said, then you know these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, I have to build on them, and these are the same in other people. So then you will try to hire somebody who will always keep a check on you, and who will say, sir, I think we need to pause a bit, right? So you will be very conscious about your strengths, weaknesses, and you'll build a very diverse team and you'll work on it that way. So I think take it as a strength. Don't try to suppress your natural strengths. Okay. Thank you. We have one question by Malay. Yeah, Malay.
Sir, you are telling in one of the point that focus is one of the key to success. We have to be focused for a long time. And I resonate with that. At the same time, as we enter MBA, we hear that we have to multitask. We have to do so many things together. Now, how do you understand this and what should we do?
See, okay, again, being multitasking doesn't mean you're not focused. Okay, see, multitasking is a mandatory thing today. So there is, you like it or not, you will be doing 3 courses, 4 courses together, plus some extracurricular activities, plus some B school competitions, plus some late night networking. All that will be part of your MBA life. You will somehow get sucked into it. Always, that's why I said self-leadership, at least in the Indian perspective, is inside out. You have to understand yourself first. See, for example, so I was from the development sector. I wanted to go and meet more people who think like me. So I know why I am doing my MBA. How many of you are very clear about why you're doing this? So I'm here to pick up some skills which I didn't get through my otherwise computer science education or my NGO experience. And I'm here to learn new things. So I'm very clear. And after this, I want to apply these new skills in the new non-profit I set up. Right? So that is a different way. Then you will choose your tasks very carefully. You will not spread too much. Right? You will not keep hopping parties one after the other. You will not be dropping out of courses and doing new courses just like that. So you will be very focused about the limited choice you make. So what I'm saying, Malay, is you will have to choose, saying that these 3 things seem very important for me, or these 5 things seem very important for me, because you are very clear internally why you have made those choices. But it is easier said than done, because usually because we are not grounded, we are not sure about ourselves, we get swayed by the external situation. So that is why I'm saying a lot of reflection, self-awareness. These are all things which you'll have to work on internally. And then the choices you make, you'll do very well. Okay. So for example, I never took part in any B school competitions while I was at B school. Right? A lot of people did. I'm not disputing them. They did well. They earned money. They did some trips. They got some good resume spikes. Right? I can't do everything, boss. Right? So if you have a buffet, you will not put everything on your plate. Right? You'll put limited things on your plate, and you can eat what you can eat, and you'll not have indigestion. So I chose things which I like, which will not get me any indigestion, and I did well. So this is where we'll have to be careful. Okay. Yeah. So again, self-awareness, read more about it, try to develop that, and then your choices will naturally be correct. Okay. So we'll have a last question by Divyansh. Yeah, Divyansh.
So you quoted Bhagavad Gita in your presentation. So
Right.
do you recommend reading Bhagavad Gita for self-realization or self-awareness?
Yeah, so thanks, Divyansh. I'll expand that question. See, I think that's a fair question. Never in your business school classes, at least I believe, glad if I am Trichy has it, at least at ISB I didn't have it, that will anybody come and talk about any philosophy, because philosophy is seen as, oh, it is for those weaker guys, right? Yeah, this is the cutting edge business world. How is any of this relevant to in today's times? So this is the common refrain. None of the case studies I did at ISB had very Indian concept or a philosophical concept, right? So always the business case study of Harvard, Kellogg, Wharton, these were this was like high flying, I mean, what should I say, corporate honchos who would come reform companies, right? But they never spoke about what influenced them in their childhood. Who are their role models? What is their favorite book, right? What is their favorite movie? What is the philosophy? How did they develop the vision for their company? These softer aspects are never reflected, right? So what makes a Mukesh Ambani become the fastest growing company within a pandemic, right? So there is, you can say, sir, he saw these numbers. No, there is something very fundamental that which is driving his lifestyle. Maybe he learned it from his dad. Maybe his dad taught him something. For example, the recent, so when I saw Mukesh Ambani's interview recently, in his library behind, there was Swami Vivekananda's complete works. Okay, did he read it or not? I don't know. But giving him the benefit of doubt, assuming he read Swami Vivekananda's complete works, I'm very sure the way he's living his life is the kind of confidence, right? Because the one thing which comes out of Vivekananda's philosophy is to go be a man, right? You achieve, right? Be fearless. what nerves of steel, muscles of iron, this type of, he's always inspiring you to be fearless about, I mean, anything which you want to do in life. And I can see it reflected in the way he is acting, right? So these are the things which you should always ask. In case you come across some people coming to your campus and you get an opportunity to ask, you should ask them that, sir, tell me more about your childhood. Tell me more about the decisions you took. Tell me more about your failures. Tell me about your favorite book. Is there a particular philosophy or a spiritual practice which guides you? Because this is not, somehow we have kind of shunned it. We have kept it in the corner saying it's my private life. It doesn't affect my corporate boardroom. It's not true. Okay. Even if you look at Steve Jobs' life, right, you know his interaction coming to India, right, with Nirmohi Baba, right, and you know about Zuckerberg who also came there. So all these people have had some interaction where they have got guidance, so that keeps them grounded even in terms of changing world. So I would, of course, I mean, the Bhagavad Gita is a definite start. You could try that. You could try many other things. I'll not get into a personal advice here. But I think that without that, you're incomplete. And that is what differentiates people. That's why I purposefully put that slide. Okay. Okay, Swati, do you have a question, or this is because you
Sir, I have just one question. On the note that you just mentioned, what was your inspiration behind setting up the Rashtraam School of Public Leadership and the Vision India Foundation?
Okay, so this is a long journey. I mean, I think the bigger key inflection point in my life came more when I quit Amazon and I came back to India. So, I mean, what should I say, right? So for example, working for Amazon in Seattle, one of the fastest growing companies, you could think of it as the ultimate achievement in life, right? In many ways, people would say, "Yeah, matlab, now you are set for a US H1 and a green card and a citizenship, and the American dream is at your doorstep. Why would you even do something nonsensical like leaving all that?" But then this is all about thinking. One is again what drives you internally, right? For me, selling more stuff to more people is not so inspiring. I'm not saying that thing is wrong, right? I have nothing against corporate career, right? It is perfect for the people who believe in it. It has made Jeff Bezos who he is today. It has benefited all our lives. Everybody has purchased from Amazon, so all of our lives have improved. But does it resonate with something deep within you is what you have to think. If it doesn't, it's about time you make a change. Especially our generation, I'm pretty sure, has the fortune of making these choices, which our parents did not, or our grandparents did not. So when we have the opportunity, are we able to reflect deeper on our life and make those choices? I thought this is important. So if that is decided, then what do you do? I'm more of a person, then I have to understand myself, my strengths, my larger objectives in life. I had to go through all this grind. This is not a straight path. There's like volatility or VUCA is inbuilt in when you go away from the beaten track, right? So you try, you succeed, you fail, you go into different types of thought that what am I doing? Then of course I picked up a lot of these philosophical ideas as well. Then I realized that towards the end, if you can call about Rashtraam, definitely what kind of irked my mind, because in 2014, I went to ISB and that's when Narendra Modi won a landslide election. And what happened after that was I found that he struggled to even get his cabinet full. He had to take a person like Manohar Parrikar, who was the chief minister of Goa, get him to be the defense minister of the country. So I'm like, what, you can't find 20 people in this 1.2 billion country who can fill your cabinet? Why do you have so few people in your team? That obviously said that there is a lack of good public leadership. When I say public leadership, I don't just mean politics. Anybody in public life, right? You had one Anna Hazare probably in 2012 who created a huge wave. How many after that, right? Even that movement was hijacked, it went political and all that. So these people who influence people, right? The public leaders of this country, they are far and few. And they're definitely not being created with a longer term national interest in mind. They're all in many ways doing their own careers and making a life for themselves and their families. So how do we build this self-aware and I would say civilizationally assured public leaders for the country? I felt it's a fair thing to try and do. I mean, and I thought nobody else is doing it, so why not? Let's do it. Sounds cool. Of course, there are several challenges behind it, but that's a very strong thing. I felt that if this country has to see a future, then something like this has to happen. And there are examples globally, even in our history, of such schools which have created such people. So I felt it's time to recreate that. Thank you, Fatih. Okay, I see more hands. I don't
Hello,
know.
sir. Sumit this side. Just one more question.
Yeah, Sumit.
Yeah. Sir, as you talked about, say, creativity is a buzzword. So it keeps on hitting us, say, on various instances, but we don't know how to work on it. Means, can you tell about your experience, like in the MBAs for the 2 years, which subjects you found more creative, or we should look even that to think out of box?
No, I see. So there is no creativity course in an MBA. I don't think there is. What should I say? But how do you apply it in the different courses you take? So the most exciting course was negotiation. I'm pretty sure even you will have it, right? Everybody wants to take it because see, negotiation is a part of our daily life. And what was fascinating for me was, usually if you know about a negotiation, you are given a case, right? So you will play a role. Suppose you play the role of the landlord, or you play the role of the company owner, and your colleague plays the role of the union leader, right? So it's a union versus a company kind of a negotiation. Fairly common, all MBAs have to be trained on this, fine. But you will find different teams come out with different results. Some places the company owner will get thrashed. In some places the union leader will make huge compromises. So just that during the negotiation, people bring out their best. It's not a very superficial creativity in terms of intimidation and things like that. I'm saying there is something within us which is still locked, right? I think we'll have to constantly come out with this and bring it out in your education, because externally nobody's training you, and I think we are on the wrong end of the age curve now, right? It's too late sometimes to be artistically creative in that sense. But can we work with very ambiguous situations and think differently is very important. Public policy, any courses if you have would be amazing, because they're very challenging situations, right? If you take the Singur Tata Motors case study, right, which Mamata Banerjee versus Ratan Tata kind of a thing, right? So this lady is not allowing him to set up a factory in West Bengal, right? So how does this whole negotiation happen, and what happens? People get thrown out. So many different external factors at play. Something happened at the end of it, that's fine. But always try to get into the mind of the people who you study, why they took those decisions. Don't just go by the appendix, they'll put some 10 tables with this, right? So they will tell you a lot of success, not as many of the things which didn't work. For example, people here may like it or not, but if you take this example of Baba Ramdev, right? For whatever reason, right? Now he's built this 10,000 crore company. He's not even probably 10th class pass. How did he tap into the psyche of the people, what they want? He built his company on that and he's grown it. But I never saw it as a case study, right? It is a very, very uniquely Indian case study about this, or Hero Cycles, or so many unlimited examples of social businesses which tap into people and understand their needs and create innovative solutions. So try to always pick and choose such things, right? If you have a guest speaker, I would find that people are not interested. People are only chasing the ones, okay, Goldman Sachs ka VP aa gaya, so you go, the classroom is full, right? But at the same time, if you have Arvind Eye Care Hospital guy there, nobody will go and listen to him, right? I'm like, no boss, Arvind Eye Care has solved a bigger problem, right? So, or whatever. So just be conscious of such things and try to make the most of it. I think by understanding their mind, you will also start thinking in a different way. Okay.
Got it, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
Rajesh, back to you.
Yes, Shobit, it has been a great afternoon listening to you, and the whole batch will really agree with the statement. Like, we have a lot more to reflect now, and after going back, like, it will take us a lot of time to digest everything what you have said. And as a concluding remarks, I would recommend Professor Varun from economics area to give few words. Please. So can you unmute yourself?
Good evening, students, as well as our guest of honor, Mr. Shobit Mathur. Actually, from all the students, I would like to thank you. From all the students of IIM Trichy, it was actually an enlightening speech, I would still say. Many aspects you have covered, not only the business aspects, which I think many faculty still will be able to explore. But the good thing which I found that you have covered the psychology of a human person, how we can work on that. That is very good. Actually, I always think that how actually mind is a very essential and I would say an important factor to determine what we will achieve in the life.